welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Deacon Henry, here from St. Madeleine Parish. So an especially warm welcome to all of our visitors and, of course, all of our parishioners as well. It's good to see all of you here today. First order of business, of course, is, as you might well imagine, was a lot of planning and work that had to go into this, so we need a great big thank you to a number of people. First and foremost, of course, is our speaker today, Dr. Mary Soha, but also for the planning committee, the volunteers, all the ministries of our parish who were ones who provided our food for today, and of course all the attendees. A few preliminaries. We do have some things for sale. Who doesn't love to shop, right? We have books about the Florida Martyrs and information and so forth. Those are $15, I believe, and those the proceeds of that go to the Our Lady of Leche to spread that devotion. Also, you see several tables set up over there where you could find out information. There's some more things to buy. You could find out information about the shrine. As I was walking over from church, I overheard someone say, what a beautiful facility this is. And indeed it is. Well, you know, this facility is available for retreats and various other events. To find that out, you just simply need to contact the office or contact the shrine office. You could hold pilgrimages here and so forth. There's also a website. Now, this is the Santa Fe Shrine of Our Lady of Leche. What you need to do is take out both of the ofs, O-F, take those out, and just one big word. Santa Fe Shrine Our Lady Leche.com. And that'll get you to the website, and that'll also, I think, get you to the Facebook page so you can find out more about upcoming events and so forth. We also have with us today the Sons of Our Lady. Here is a Son of Our Lady right now, Gert Beltman. A diocesan organization established, I guess, by our bishop for Our Lady of Leche and our big celebration. They are available for various events. If you, for example, if anyone here is interested in starting a chapter of the Sons of Our Lady, and I see someone cheering in the back there already, so I think that's going to happen, feel free to talk to any of them, talk to Gert or anyone else in that kind of a shirt, and I'm sure they're going to be happy to be able to help us out with that. Okay, but enough of me. Now the person we came for, Dr. Mary Soha. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She did her undergraduate studies at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama, a school I know well. I have some friends who went there. Of course, she did her graduate studies at the University of Florida. Go Gators. That's the highlight here, I think, because then she went to the University of Miami for medical school. Okay. Us Gators, we have to go and spread our wisdom and knowledge in other schools, too. So. She did her residency at the Medical College of Virginia. She is married to her husband, Michael, for 35 years. They have 8 sons, three daughters-in-law, 2 grandchildren, and 2 on the way. So she's a practicing, she keeps herself busy. Where do you hear this? She's a practicing pediatrician. Her interests are in sports medicine, neurobehavioral disease, and fatty acid metabolic research. We won't ask her what she thinks of me. Now, what I found fascinating is that she was one of the physician investigators for the cause of Saint Ketteri Tekakwitha, who was canonized very recently, I think in 2012. Yeah. As a visitor to her shrine up in Fonda, New York, I have a particular devotion to her, so I was really pleased to see this. She's also a physician investigator for the cause for Jacinta and Francisco Marto, the children of Fatima, for their canonization. She was named a vice postulator for the cause of the Martyrs of Florida by our bishop. All right. She's the chairperson of our canonical coronation of Our Lady of La Leche, which is going to be a big diocesan celebration here for us on October 11th. So we are very, very privileged and happy to have her. Enough of me. Please welcome Dr. Mary Soha. All right.
But I gotta move you.
You want all this?
Oh.
He's got all of his notes on napkins and okay. Where'd my notes go? All right, good morning, everyone. I am a bit of a storyteller, so if you want to see the didactic lecture, I did do a very academic lecture on the Martyrs of La Florida. It's on YouTube. It's under the Knights of Columbus. It's a Knights of Columbus production, and I don't remember if it's 2 or 3 hours long, but it's more academic. But I find that when I go out into the parishes, that this is a story, and especially when they're parishes within our own diocese, this is a story of love and adventure and sacrifice and catechesis that really needs more of a storyteller approach, more of a loving approach. So it won't be very didactic. I never know which way the Holy Spirit is going to lead the talk to go. It's never the same way twice, as the sons will tell you. I have to reach out and give a great big thank you to the Sons of Our Lady. I presented to them several years ago the story of the Florida Martyrs, and they've just been phenomenal. They kind of adopted me, which is great because they help set up these sorts of interactions with all the different parishes so that we can get out and tell this story. This is one of the most beautiful stories of catechesis. For me, it's the largest, greatest, most beautiful defense of the Eucharist in our nation's history. And it's a history that for 200, 300 years has been hidden and is just now coming to light. And so what we'll get to in the second part of the talk is more about what does all of this mean for us today. It has some very important implications, I think. So, since all of you here, I'm pretty sure, are familiar with Our Lady of La Leche, if we can start this morning with this prayer. Does everybody have a card? If not, the sons have cards to pass out. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. O most beautiful Mother, help us to accept your invitation to total intimacy, total communion with your Son, Jesus Christ. You gave your whole self, body and soul to God, who in turn gave his only Son, through you, for the salvation of all mankind. You draw each of us as close to you as you were with your infant Son. You offer the milk and honey, the sustenance found in the Scriptures, that of the true God and true man, found only in the Eucharist. Keep us safe within the folds of your mantle. Nourish us with the courage to receive your Son more fully in the Eucharist, and open our hearts to be able to do whatever he tells us, to be able to sing our Magnificat. Our Lady of La Leche, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. So the talk today, Liz asked me to kind of do it in 4 parts. We're going to talk a little bit about history, and that's going to be more of a secular history sort of approach. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about the catechesis and what we've learned from the secular history. And then we'll have a little break. So somebody, if you guys start getting restless, I'm going to say it's break time. And I see we have enough food here that I could probably talk through dinner. But so we'll just kind of get going at that. And then after the break, we'll go into a little more detail about the martyrs themselves and what that means for us today. I do a lot of commercials, so be ready. We're Catholic. I already heard all the shopping commercials. So we'll kind of do that on and off. Well, we all learn a lot about Florida history, but how do we learn it? We learn it in the context of the British perspective. And in La Florida, that means we're missing a huge amount of our own personal history, because Florida isn't even really, you're not even taught about Florida history around the rest of the nation until we get into the U.S. possession of Florida. So, we know that Florida was occupied by Spain and Britain and then Spain again, but do we really know what all happened? So what I'd like to do is kind of set the stage for what was going on in the New World. First of all, Queen Isabella and Ferdinand, their whole goal was sending Christopher Columbus around the world, was not to discover new lands. They didn't even know there were new lands. Their goal was to compete on the European market and be able to get trade goods from the Orient back to the European market faster than the French and the British. And that way they would have an economic advantage. Isabella was one of the first monarchs in Europe to unite her country, so that it actually became a nation. I mean, Italy was a group of city-states. England was a land of fiefdoms. France was kind of all over the place. So when we think of nation, we think of a united front. When we think of Germany and France and even Spain today, we think of it as a nation. But it didn't get started as a nation until under Isabella. So she united her country. She was trying to find a way to help her country have a little economic advantage. Now, Columbus was a pretty brilliant astronomer and a mathematician. And so he knew that the world was round, and he also knew that pi r squared, the circumference of a circle. So when he set off to find a route to the Orient, he pretty much thought he was just going to cross ocean till he got to the Orient. So when he got here and found that there were new lands, this changed the whole landscape of the Spanish Empire. One of the interesting things I like to ask is, where do we get the word Indian from? This is a little commercial. Hi, Vincent. How are you? Good to see you. Friendly face. Where do we get the word Indian from? Does anybody know, or venture a guess, or what we've always been taught? Are you going to tell me what you've been taught or what you know?
I'll stay quiet.
Okay, stay quiet. So most people say, oh, well, Columbus thought he landed in India, so he called them Indians. That's what most of us have been taught. Well, that's a very British perspective, trying to kind of not be complimentary to Columbus's navigational skills. He had been to India twice. He knew what people in India looked like. But the word that he used was indígena, the Spanish word for indigenous. So that is really where our word Indian comes from. And for those of you who knew Father Groeschel was the one who did the research to find the origin of the word Indian. So I think that's kind of commercial, kind of a little fascinating. So when Spain was very Catholic, and there was no division of church and state. So for Isabella and Ferdinand, the finding of these new worlds meant catechesis. First and foremost, catechesis. We can bring these people to the one true faith. And so when the Caribbean and the Mexican peninsula, the Yucatan Peninsula, and South America was being, I hate to use the word colonized, but it truly was colonized by the Spanish at that time, the missionaries had a very hard go of it, because they were trying to preach this beautiful fullness of the Native American spirituality in understanding who Jesus Christ was. But yet you had the Spanish military who was not living that Catholic faith. So it made preaching very hard. One of the beautiful things I find about the early missionaries in the Yucatan Peninsula especially was they didn't go in and tell the Indians that they were wrong, that their spirituality was wrong. They went in to say, we have the fullness of your belief in one Creator God. Most of the Native Americans, especially the Nahuatl Nation, which was the Mexican nation, so we're not going to talk about the Aztecs because that's a separate, very small group of people compared to the Nahuatl Nation, which is who Cortez interfaced with. The Nahuatl people believed in one true God. They believed in a Creator God. And they believed that one day God would send his son into the world to be a direct communication. So I'm going to assume that all of you in this room were at least born Christian, correct? You grew up your whole life. Oh no, I'm sorry. I got one here. Thank you though. Yeah, I get going. Sorry. You grew up your whole life knowing who Jesus Christ was. You grew up your whole life being able to communicate, to pray with your Creator as a human. Well, imagine you're in a society that believes in one true God, one Creator God, but doesn't know how to communicate except through the world you live in. So these are the people that were in the New World. So we're, the evangelization maybe in the northern part of the United States is far, far different than it was in Central, South America and La Florida. The missionaries came in with the attitude that these are God's children and we need to help them relate to their God better through Jesus Christ. So for a lot of people, that's an amazing thing. Who wouldn't want to have the fullness of their spirituality? Which brings us to the miracle of Mexico. In Mexico, after Cortez did not conquer Mexico or the Aztec culture, the Nahuatl people did. Cortez was on the peninsula with only 210 sailors. You're going to tell me that 210 sailors, even if they had Uzi machine guns, are going to overtake a civilization of 20 million people? I don't think so. So that conversion that happened on the Yucatan Peninsula happened because in the Nahuatl mythology, if you will, in their prophecy, they had believed that in the ivory year of the Aztec calendar, a man with fair skin and hair on his face would come and would bring news of God's Son. And they held on to that, especially after they were conquered by the Aztec people. But the Nahuatl people were the people who believed in one true God. And so when Cortez landed and he had priests with him and a Nahuatl translator, the Nahuatl translator was able to share with the people this beautiful Catholic faith. And within the first 5 years of Cortez landing, over 250,000 Nahuatl Indians pledged their support of Cortez in their land. The rest of that was kind of history. The Aztec leader, Montezuma II, realized that this was the prophet, if you will, that fulfilled the prophecy in the Nahuatl people. And it was the Nahuatl people that rose up and overthrew the Aztecs at that time in Mexico. So history, again, has to be corrected. The Spaniards that were with Cortez, where the greed got ahead of them, all ended up drowning because they filled their canoes with too much gold and silver and emeralds after the downfall of Mexico City. And as they were leaving and had all this in their canoes, they ended up drowning. So the greed got to them a little bit. We know, though, that after the Spanish began to settle and establish what was supposed to be trade routes with the Mexican people, with the Nahuatl people, we know that the Spanish military, being how many thousands of miles away from the King and Queen of Spain, broke with their orders, broke with the law of Spain, and began to enslave the Native Americans, take their lands, and steal their gold, their silver, their emeralds, and their jewels that they found. So the situation by 1531 became quite desperate in Mexico. Bishop Zumárraga, who was then the bishop of the Yucatan Peninsula, realized what was going on, and he excommunicated the general and the lieutenant governor. In Spanish law, if you were excommunicated, you lost your title, your lands, your income, and your retirement plan. That was just the way it was. Well, the lieutenant governor and the general intercepted the bishop's letters back to the King and Queen of Spain and to the Pope. They put him under house arrest, and he was under a death threat that if he left his house to do anything, he could be killed. So poor Bishop Zumárraga's prayer, he realized what was going on in Europe with the Reformation, how many Catholics were being killed, tortured, or had left their Catholic faith. For him, it looked like the entire world was imploding. And he offered up this very heartfelt prayer where he told God that, dear Lord, if you do not directly intervene, I am afraid all will be lost. Shortly after that, this little wonderful Telecoco Indian, whose name was Cuauhtlatzin, has an experience of Our Lady. And it's the Cuauhtlatzin is the Nahuatl name for Juan Diego. He was a full Telecoco Indian. Our Lady appeared to him over the course of 3 days, and on that third day, her gift to his people was the image on the tilma. After the image on the tilma was presented to the bishop and he had this wonderful just joy in his heart that his prayer had been heard, he allowed Juan Diego to go through the countryside with the tilma, and in the space of 5 years, 9 million Native Americans converted to Catholicism. That's huge. No, there were only 600 Spanish soldiers on the Yucatan Peninsula in 1531. There is no way 600 soldiers at gunpoint are going to have forced conversions of this nature. And that's what we're taught as kids over and over again, how the Spanish forced the conversion of people. And now, I think our dear Lord just got tired of it. And now this history is coming out to say, no, you know how you believe as Catholics. You know what right and wrong is. How is that going to be any different from the Catholics who lived in the 1500s, in the 1600s, in the 1700s? It's not. And we know that they had to have lived out their Catholic faith the way we're trying to live out our Catholic faith. So we have to go back and look at some of this history and try to put it in the right perspective. There's a beautiful book that's written by two gentlemen from Christendom College, and the title of the book is Past as Pilgrimage. So those of you who are academicians, Vincent, I see you writing it down. It's a beautiful book, and it really is encouraging those who are very interested in history to go back and study the source and to rewrite history from a truth perspective. The Catholic Church has never been afraid of the truth. We've had good popes, we've had bad popes. But guess what? Not one bad pope ever wrote an encyclical that had to be overturned. The Holy Spirit said he would protect the faith, and I think that's what he's doing. And now he's encouraging us, especially through the story of the Martyrs of La Florida, to go back and look at that history again, to make it consistent within the concept of faith. So Spain was very anti-slavery. The first anti-slavery bill came out in 1597. Ponce de Leon and Columbus especially after a couple trips to the New World, his spirituality sort of changed a little bit, and he became a little bit more mercenary. And he kept trying to petition Isabella and Ferdinand to begin a slave trade with the Indians from the Caribbean, because they were very docile, they would be very easy to enslave. And Isabella fought it, and so in 1494 she convened a kind of a symposium of 50 men who were scholars, canon lawyers, secular lawyers, and she wanted them to come up with a definition of slavery that was ironclad, so that as a queen she could say there will be no slavery in this land. Because what had happened was she had said no slavery. Well, everyone took that to mean, well, people who aren't paid. So a lot of the Caribbean slaveholders would pay the native people only like a few pennies for a year, and they said, well, we're paying them, but it's still enslaving them. It's not enough to live off of. So she wanted an ironclad definition, and that came out in 1497. Then again in 1543 at the Council of Valladolid, the Spanish monarchy again came out in true to their Catholic faith and said there will be no slavery in the entire Spanish Empire. That meant all the way to the Philippines. We know that didn't happen, but it's not a reflection on the throne, and it's not a reflection on our Catholic faith. It was made a law, but how are you going to enforce a law if half of your military isn't even paying attention to you? So we have to go back and kind of put our mindsets in what was happening at the time. After all the upheaval in Mexico and the hard time that the missionaries were having with catechesis, Father Las Casas, who later became Bishop Las Casas, he and another priest, Father Luis de Cancer, who was one of our first Martyrs of La Florida here, they got together, two Dominicans, and they said, what are we doing wrong? How can we improve in our catechesis of these people so that they get the true understanding and appreciation of the Catholic faith? Well, they worked hard on a new format, and they came up with 3 things that all priests had to do to be good catechetical workers. One was they had to learn the language of the people they were going to serve. They had to learn the culture of the people they were going to serve. And then they had to learn the value system. What was their value? Not monetary, but their values. What were they? And then after they learned these three things, they kind of took a fourth vow like the Jesuits do, a fourth vow to the Pope. The fourth vow was that they would be willing to go out in the field unaccompanied by the military, which meant you were putting your lives on the line. But they found that the presence of Spanish military, because of their sinful lifestyles, was hurting their catechetical events. So that was the catechesis that was put into play. It was adopted by Pope Urban VIII, and it was adopted by the King and Queen of Spain at the time when La Florida was being settled, if you will. The monarchs wanted to protect Florida. So they issued an edict that said no Spanish military could go into Florida until it had been catechized. Well, you know, the Velasquez in Cuba and a few other guys in Cuba did not listen to that edict, and some of the sailors went into the area of Miami into Tampa Bay area, and they stole Native Americans for their slave trade in the Caribbean, and they had burned a couple of villages and things like that. So unfortunately, in Central and South Florida, the natives were already sensitized to the Europeans. When Ponce de Leon found St. Augustine, his first landing in St. Augustine, I think it's fortuitous that it was Easter Sunday, 1513, and that was also the time when he gave the title La Pascua de Florida, the flowers of Easter. And that was how we got our name La Florida. And then nothing was settled. He just landed and was mapping out the coast. Then comes Menendez in 1565. Menendez was the head admiral of the entire Spanish Navy, which encompassed the known world at that time. It was to him, because of his great Catholic faith, that he was asked to be the one to settle La Florida. He had two objectives that he was given. One was to establish a presidio, or a deep water port, so that Spain could hold their little man-of-war ships to protect their shipping lines from Central and South America over to Spain. But his second and probably more important directive from the King and Queen of Spain was the catechesis of La Florida. The King and Queen of Spain pledged 4.3 million coins to that catechesis to provide priests, altar cloths, communion, wine, everything that would be needed for catechesis in those days. And Menendez himself pledged 6 million coins, even more than the throne. Menendez was very, very devout, a devout Catholic, and very committed to this second mandate from the King and Queen of Spain. So when Menendez found St. Augustine on the Feast of St. Augustine in 1565, his goal was to find that deep water port, establish that presidio, and begin catechizing. And the rest kind of becomes history. September 8th is the first landing. Now, it was not the first Mass in the United States, and it wasn't even the first Mass in Florida. De Soto had priests with him when he came through. There were many other Masses that had been said. But what we do say is it's the first parish Mass in Florida, in the United States, and it's the oldest operating parish. We're not the oldest diocese, but we are the oldest parish. So that makes things more historically accurate to be able to use that language. Menendez's first thing, of course, was to kiss the cross and to claim this land in honor of the name of God. And so that's kind of where we start. And the Timucua, they saw this and they saw the reverence. And any of you who have ever worked with Native Americans, even if they're not Christianized Native Americans, they have a unique sense of sacred. And they understand both the physical and the spiritual sense of sacred. So for me, one of the reasons I have gotten so involved in Native American causes is what I've learned is Native American spirituality and Catholicism is this perfect blend of the mysticism of the Orient with the tangibility of the West, taken in a Catholic context. So kind of a little maybe what the Garden of Eden must have been like. You know, here's Adam walking around face to face with God. I mean, fully physical and fully spiritual, all at the same time. And that's kind of what we were created to be. So to help us understand that in our day and time, and understand that who we were created to be is body and soul together, and that's our perfected state. That's kind of what I think the Native Americans understand with their sense of sacred. So when we had our first Mass, and the Timucuas just valued this reverence so much, and then they were introduced to Jesus Christ, and it was almost an immediate conversion, if you will. There were some problems in the beginning, but again, those were more secular and political scuffles with humans on humans, and the military not being as well versed in catechesis as the priests who were with Menendez. The Timucua people were a brilliant people. The way that the Spanish documents describe the native people in Florida is completely different than the way the British documents describe the Indians that they met. Most of us learned that the British felt that Native Americans were illiterate, savage, inhumane, uncivilized, and one of the reasons the British did that was to make them seem less human so that it was morally justified to have a slave trade. The first slave trade in the United States was not African Americans, it was Native Americans. So when the British landed, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but when the British landed and they found out there was no gold or silver or gems in North America, they had to switch their economy to agriculture. You need a lot of labor and cheap labor for agriculture to be profitable. So when they ran out of prisoners and the indentured servants that they brought over from Ireland and Scotland, then they turned to the slave trade. In Florida, it was very difficult because by then, most of the Native Americans had been catechized, and they knew that they had an infinite value in the eyes of God. The Timucua people were phenomenal linguists, and if any of you get a chance to go to the University of Florida to their library, they now have about 2,000 original Timucua documents that were written before the first Europeans ever landed in La Florida. I was at a Franciscan conference up at Flagler about 8 years ago, and this one gentleman was presenting all of the work he had done at Santa Elena up on the coast of Georgia, South Carolina. He had spent 32 years, and they had excavated this beautiful mission of La Florida, and some of the archaeologists, like Dr. Deegan, and they were presenting their excavations, and it was a beautiful conference. And then this one linguist, he was at that time from SUNY up in New York, and he presented his research. And he was the gentleman who found these original documents in Timucua, found one of Father Parga's catechisms of the Catholic Church that had been translated into Timucua language. And he was showing that the Timucua had a very beautiful written language. And all of a sudden, the whole room, there was this sigh, this like sorrowful sigh. And all these archaeologists were like, we just threw away parchment. We didn't pay attention to any of that because we have always been trained that Indians were illiterate. So all of these decades of research and digging and anything that looked like parchment or paper or sticks on a paper that they didn't understand, they didn't pay attention to. But for me, it was such a point in time where, wow, we are so prejudiced in some of our education and our learning, and we really have to go back to the truth. These are people, they're humans. Why wouldn't they find a way to communicate and have things in posterity? And so now, I don't know if any of you saw in the papers a couple of weeks ago, they had that Dr. Tim Johnson, who's a professor of religious studies at Flagler. He's on sabbatical right now. He's also one of the historians for the cause for the Martyrs of La Florida. And he was in Oxford doing some research, and he came across an original manuscript that Father Pargas, that's called the Mass Explained into Mukwa. And it's like, oh, what a gift. I mean, these things have been buried for so long. What a gift, and it's coming out in our lifetime. So I just want to paint the picture that these Native Americans that the Spanish encountered are so different from what the British portray them in the history books. So after the Mission Nombre de Dios was established, then the Jesuits came. We had Father Pedro Martinez, who was our first Jesuit. He was a noted scholar. He came over on several Danish ships, believe it or not, and he's noted for turning, the captain told him, "You have turned all my sailors into saints," on the trip over. His catechesis was so good. But so the missionaries started coming. The Spanish set up their presidio. They had their deep water port. The Spanish never stole property from the native people. Now remember, we're talking about the first Spanish period from 1565 to 1763. And 2 years ago, Father Rodriguez, who is one of our Dominicans, who is one of our vice postulators for the Florida Martyrs, he was doing research in Seville and Madrid over in Spain, and he uncovered an entire, they're in boxes, unfortunately, but boxes of receipts where the King and Queen of Spain paid rent for the property that Castillo de San Marcos sits on. So they never stole or took the property from the Native Americans. So it was kind of neat to see, wow, they were consistent with our Catholic heritage. Okay, somebody watching the time for me, so because I'll go on for hours and hours, and I know we'll need a break at some point. So that's pretty much the secular history kind of leading up to the missionary events in Florida. Once the Jesuits were here, the Jesuits had some very bad experiences. Pedro Martinez, the first Jesuit martyr in North America, was martyred outside of Mayport, outside of Jacksonville. He was martyred. Several more Jesuits came. They established a province here. 7 went to an area called Ajacan, which is outside Richmond, Virginia. They were with an interpreter, and the interpreter kind of sold them, I guess, if you will, sold the Jesuits out, and they were martyred, all 7 of them. So the Jesuits, after that, kind of pulled out of Florida. The Dominicans, with Father Luis de Cancer, they were some of the first to arrive in La Florida. Well, they thought they were the first in 1549, and they entered into the Tampa Bay area. 3 of the Dominicans, 1 priest and 2 brothers, got off the boat to try to start catechizing. They were immediately killed on the beach because the Spanish captain did not share with Father Luis de Cancer that these Indians had already been sensitized because several sailors had already been in there, destroyed property, and stolen some of the Native Americans for the slave trade. So Father thinks he's stepping into virgin territory, and he's not. So the next day, Father Luis de Cancer, who worked with Bishop Las Casas to come up with this form of catechesis, he gets off the boat to try to go catechize and find his friends, and he is also in turn martyred. So that kind of stopped the Dominican presence in La Florida. So at this point, the parochial priests wouldn't come because they didn't want to go out without military presence. The Jesuits had come and had experienced several martyrdoms. The Dominicans said, no, we're not going there if we can't have military installations. So the only priests that would take up the call for evangelization in La Florida were the Franciscans. And the Franciscans came, and they started in St. Augustine, and they built the first seminary. Can anybody give a guess when the first graduating class of that seminary was? What year? Just throw out a year, what you think.
Like 1650?
Okay, it actually was, that's close, but it actually was 1606.
1606.
Can you believe that? We had a seminary. We graduated in the first graduating class, 10 seminarians. We don't even get that now. I mean, this is amazing. So, so the Franciscans came and they built their Franciscan structure. They had a seminary. Bishop Altamirano, who was a Dominican bishop in Santiago de Cuba, which was our diocese at the time, in 1606, in honor of the first class graduating in St. Augustine, brought 10 of his seminarians up from Cuba and ordained all 20 of them at Mission Nombre de Dios. Well, what a gift. That blows people's minds when you say, we had an ordination of 20 priests in 1606. And so the Franciscans started to build the mission chain. The mission chain started out of Nombre de Dios, went up north. Santa Elena was a big provincial headquarters for the Franciscans, traveled north up to the Chesapeake Bay. Most of the missions were centered around Tallahassee and the Appalachian people. The missions went as far west. Now we know up to Mobile. We're getting more and more history coming. And so at one point in the mid-1600s, there was 157 active Franciscan missions with over 250,000 catechized, baptized Native Americans in the territory of La Florida. That's huge. That takes it out of just a bare frontier land kind of a story. The missions are interesting around the Tallahassee area because the Appalachian Indians, once they started hearing the stories from the Timucuans and the Guali people about the faith that these Franciscans were bringing and how beautiful it was to now not only experience our Creator in human forms, but to be able to receive Him in Holy Communion. That was huge. And once that story started to spread through La Florida, the Appalachian people did something very, very unique. There was an east-west trail. It wasn't called the Camino in Native American terms. We still don't know what that trade route was called. But in St. Augustine, the Timucua people have this perfect mix of limestone and oyster shells. And if you mix that and you set it on fire, you get a very high dry heat. So the native people had learned how to dry food. So they had dry fish, dry deer, dry fowl. And so Indians would come, Native Americans would come from all over these trade routes to trade for these fish and meat that would last for long periods of time. So there was already trade routes established. Well, when the Appalachian people heard about the catechesis of the Franciscans and heard that they would be coming out into the wilderness to try to catechize, they would go out along this trail and erect huge crosses to try to attract them into their village to begin their catechesis. How amazing is that? I just wow, these people understood. And so the priests would go out one or two at a time, and they'd go out along this trail. And the way the Appalachian structure is they would invite the priests to come in. The priests would begin to teach the Catholic faith. And then the chief would decide, yeah, I think we want to learn more as a group, as a family, as a village. And so at that point in time, the village would change its structure from being a village to being called a doctrina. And once you were a doctrina, you were under formal religious education for conversion to Catholicism. And it was different for every village, depending on their degree of motivation and how the priests felt they were doing with their conversion. But sometimes it was as much as early as 6 months, sometimes it took as long as 2 years for a doctrina to have everyone ready for a full conversion. At the end of their instruction period, the chief would get together with the people of the village and say, do we want to convert? And they would convert as a family. Once they went from a doctrina and had their full conversion, then they became known as a mission. Now, the importance of a mission was not to have a priest assigned, because there weren't enough priests to go around. The value and the beauty for the native people to become a mission was that they were allowed to have a tabernacle with the Eucharist present, in their presence. And I read the accounts of how the native people described this great gift, this great joy, that they could now work every single day knowing that God was directly in their presence. They understood that. You know, how many of us, when we drive past a Catholic church, turn and look inside and say, "Hi, Jesus, I know you're in there." You know, they had that awareness that Christ was in their midst, not just spiritually, but physically as well. The chief of the mission, after they became a mission, the chief would move his house from the center of the village to the side so the tabernacle could be in the center. And if any of you have been to Mission San Luis up in Tallahassee, you know how huge that house is. The chief's house up at Mission San Luis can sleep 300 Braves and have 1,200 people inside at the same time. That is how huge some of these chiefs' houses were. But yet they were willing to dismantle them and move them completely so that Christ could occupy the center of their life. They got it. They understood this. So that's a little basis for going into. Florida was amazing in the early 1600s. There was maybe 1 or 2 epidemics of flu at that time that took out, that some of the Indians died from. But I cannot find an archaeologist yet today in the state of Florida that has uncovered a mass burial ground to say that Native Americans died in the hundreds or the thousands by European diseases brought in. Again, as a physician, I think that's another British history maneuver to block the beauty of catechesis in La Florida. When you look at the North American experience, yes, a lot. We have tons of documentation of entire Indian villages being wiped out. St. Catery's village being one of them, being wiped out by smallpox and measles and mumps. But when you read further into the British military propaganda, they intentionally impregnated blankets and clothing and gifts that they gave the Indians with these European diseases with a high inoculum, meaning a large amount of the bacteria and viruses, to intentionally wipe out huge populations, because the British found it was far easier to use germ warfare and wipe out entire populations and not waste their shot so they could use it when they hunted. So to go back in history again and relook at this, because I kept saying, okay, everything I read says all the Indians in Florida were dying of European diseases, and in the first Spanish period, I could not find that. So we have a lot more research to do, don't we, I think. So Florida in the mid-1600s was this beautiful haven of catechesis. When Bishop Calderon came up in 1640, his assistant, a Dominican named Father Vincent Ferrer de Andrade, I could never remember his name, but now I can and will probably never forget it, because when he made a 4-month tour of La Florida, and the bishop confirmed over 3,500 Native Americans, baptized over 17,000 Native Americans on his 4-month trip here to Florida, Father Vincent fell in love with the native people. And he asked his order if he could be dispensed from his Dominican vows. And he came to St. Augustine, went to the seminary, became a Franciscan, and actually ended up becoming a Franciscan priest in the Florida mission chain. And he was actually martyred not too far from here with 2 of his altar boys. So I'll never forget, because I kept saying, Father Vincent Ferrer, that's a Dominican name. Why is he a Franciscan? And so it took a long time to find his story, but that was his conversion after he came to La Florida. So the Franciscans were in love with the people that were here. The people that were here were in love with finding this new faith and exploring it and learning more. They had this very strong dedication to Jesus Christ in the presence of the Eucharist. And right before the break, I think I'll spend just a few minutes talking about the devotion to Our Lady of La Leche. And we'll go into, at the end, if we have some time, we'll go into the history of the image of Our Lady of La Leche. But right now, I think it's important to understand the start of the Fama. Our Lady of La Leche, the first image, was brought to St. Augustine in 1596 by Father Blas Rodriguez, a Franciscan. The image was brought here, was after the original image in Spain, but this is before the image was installed as one of the official patronesses of Spain. That didn't happen until 1598. So it's kind of unique that just as Spain was becoming aware of Our Lady of La Leche, the people here in La Florida were becoming aware of Our Lady of La Leche at the same time. So I just love seeing how the Holy Spirit weaves all of us together, even if we're not even aware of it. When Our Lady of La Leche was brought here, the most beautiful thing for the Native Americans was this image of a nursing mother, but from a spiritual perspective. This proved to them that God the Father sent his Son into the world, and that Jesus Christ could be understood as true God and true man. This represented the incarnation for them. And it was such a beautiful image. And so when Our Lady arrived here in 1596, a chapel, a small outside grotto was built for her right away, and it quickly morphed into a shrine. And it's very interesting to me that of all the Florida missions, every Florida mission, the church had the same name as the mission. The only place where that was different was Mission Nombre de Dios. After 1596, it was always known as the Shrine of Our Lady of La Leche, or the Indian Shrine. It was like Florida's Rome. Native Americans would come from all around the state on pilgrimages. The chiefs would come and would write their last will and testaments, and we'll get into one specific last will and testament in the second half of the talk. So Our Lady drew people from all over this section of the country to her, not to meet her, but to meet her incarnate Son. And I think that was a huge turning point for the Native Americans. Just like Our Lady of the oldest known image of Our Lady is the image of the Maria Lactans in the Catacombs of Priscilla in Rome. That image dates back to 150 AD. And I can't help but think that in the middle of all the Christian persecutions that happened in the Roman Empire, remember, Romans and Greeks and, those people painted a portrait of God where, humans were worthless, human life was worthless, that gods just had fun at human expense. Caesar considered himself a god, therefore he could, human life had no value for him either. But yet the human heart knows that it has an infinite value. It knows that we have a creator who loves us. And so you have this little tiny image of a nursing Madonna in the catacombs of Rome saying that this is the true Son of God, how he came into the world to redeem man. I can't help that it was that image that caused the conversion of the Roman Empire. And we see that over and over again in history with the image of at the Milk Grotto outside of Jerusalem, Ephesus. There's so many places where Our Lady, as the nursing Madonna, has been instrumental in the conversion of hearts. So that's a little bit of the start of Our Lady of La Leche. So we'll take a break right now, if that's okay, and I'll start right back up again in 10 minutes. So this part of the talk, we're going to get a little personal with these people that we call the Martyrs of La Florida. How did this all get started? Who knows how things get started? I can only tell you a little bit about how I got involved in this cause for canonization. In January of 2014, we only knew the names of 7 of the Martyrs of La Florida. We had ideas that many people had been martyred defending the Catholic faith. Bishop Barreau, who was the first bishop of the Diocese of St. Augustine when it was formalized as a diocese within the United States, he was in St. Augustine, and he had been Bishop of Savannah prior to coming to Florida. And in Savannah, they've kept alive the Guali martyrs for a long time. So I'll start with the Gwali Martyrs because it's kind of a fascinating epoch in time. But to start with the canonization, so January 14th in Tallahassee, we had the first Florida Catholic History Conference that we've had in who knows how many hundred of years. And they called in, we had Michael Gannon was there, John Worth, Kathleen Deacon, some of the big names that people recognize in the history, the archaeology, the spiritual anthropology of Florida. And out of that, they invited me to come to present Native American Catholicism, because I had just finished working on Cattery's cause for canonization, and so it was beautiful. They had the director of Orisville, the shrine where Cattery was born. She came down and gave a presentation, and I gave a presentation. And out of that conference, the lay people in Tallahassee got together and said, we need to try to open the cause for these martyrs again. The cause for the Florida Martyrs was actually tried to be opened in 1704 by King Philip of Spain. In 1705, Pope Clement XI himself tried to open the cause for the Martyrs of La Florida. In the early 1900s, Bishop Michael Gannon, he tried to open the cause for the Martyrs of La Florida, and that didn't go anywhere. In 1982, the first bishop of the newly formed Tallahassee, Pensacola Diocese, Bishop Garcita, he tried to open the cause for the Martyrs of La Florida. Each time it fell through. And then this little handful of lay people up in Tallahassee got together and said, we need to try again. We need to try again. This story is too important, not only for American Catholicism, American Catholics, but also the story of La Florida. And so this handful of people from Tallahassee petitioned, worked with Bishop Parks, who was the Bishop of Tallahassee at the time. They put together all the information they had to date, which wasn't very much, but it was enough. And they got the cause open. Rome accepted that we could pursue opening the cause. So then what happened from January 2014 till March 2015, we actively started doing research. And I was invited at that time just to be part of it because it was so fascinating to me. And living in so close to St. Augustine at the time, I was very versed with the history of the shrine in St. Augustine. And so as we started doing our research and started polling more and more resources, we went from 7 names to 50 names almost within 2 months. And then we went to 86 names with eyewitness accounts of their martyrdoms. And so when we sent the final petition for the opening of the cause to Rome, we had 86 names and 50 different martyrdom events that we submitted to Rome. So within that very brief period of time from March 2015, our cause was accepted and we had the formal opening of the cause for the Martyrs of La Florida on October 12th, 2015. And the Sons of Our Lady, where are you guys? Woohoo! They were there. They were some of our first witnesses to the opening of this cause. So it's amazing how fast things have happened. Now, since the opening of the cause, we're now up to over 400 documented eyewitness accounts of men, women, children, soldiers, priests who died defending the real presence of Christ here in La Florida. One of the beautiful things about Isabella, she was a stickler for details, and so she mandated that anything that happened in the New World, if it was of a secular or a religious nature, it had to be documented. It had to be documented in triplicate. If it was of a secular nature, it had to be notarized in a secular court. If it was of a religious nature, it had to be notarized in both a secular court and an ecclesiastical court. So they were very she was a stickler for following the law, to the letter of the law, as they say. And it was important to have things in triplicate back then because you had fires, you had shipwrecks, you had invasions, and she wanted to make sure that the founding, that what was happening in the New World was well chronicled. And so now as we're trying to piece together this story of Florida, the martyrs who we do know and do have, the accounts of their martyrdoms are eyewitness accounts. And generally what would happen is the British would invade with the Creeks or the Yamasee or their paid assassins, if you would. And some of the native people would escape, but they wouldn't just leave. They would stay in hiding and give witness to what was happening. And then after the British would leave, the majority of the Native Americans would make their way all the way to St. Augustine, where they would give their sworn testimony as to what they saw. And that sworn testimony would be given both in a secular court and in an ecclesiastical court, and it would be notarized. So as this research is coming to light, and it's only through the guidance of the Holy Spirit that we're finding the majority of these stories, they've already been notarized. So our historians don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel and prove everything because they were formally notarized in the proper courts at the time. So that's what makes this cause a little bit different. So we're going to kind of launch into now getting to know some of these martyrs. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about all 416. I haven't even talked to all 416 yet. So we're still learning a lot of the stories about them. We talked about Father Luis de Cancer, but in 1549. Now we're going to talk about the Gwali martyrs because I think theirs is a very unique story that has a quick retribution time, if you will, or a quick turnover time, or reconversion time. So the Gwali people are just north of the freshwater Timucua people, so mostly along the coast of Georgia. And the Franciscans went up and had built 6 missions very quickly. So in 1597, there were 6 missions already established in the Georgia, the Golden Isles, if you will. And everything was going wonderfully with the conversion except for 2 of the chiefs. Now, they were preaching the Catholic faith, and we believe in monogamy. Well, some of the chiefs weren't quite happy with having to give up 4 or 5 extra wives. and so they decided to push back about this question of polygamy. And 2 of the chiefs decided that they were going to stir up the six tribes. And so they raised like a little civil war, if you will. The 6 mission churches were burnt down and destroyed. 5 of the 6 Franciscans were martyred. The sixth Franciscan was pummeled and beaten, but the Christian Indians of his mission rescued him and got him to St. Augustine. When he got down to the Presidio, the lieutenant governor at the time, the captain of the guard, interrogated the priest and asked him who did this to you, and wanted to know because he was going to take the military up and do some punishment. And the priest invoked his right of clerical secrecy or containment because he didn't want innocent people to be killed for this event. And so that little pause in all of this emotion caused the lieutenant governor at the time to stop and think for a minute and say, how can I solve this problem in keeping with my Catholic faith and not just launch a counterattack from a military perspective? And so what he did is he sent messengers up to the 6 chiefs, and he said, if you will deliver to us who was responsible for this uprising, we will have a trial and we will merit out justice, and that will be the end of it. Well, the chiefs got together and decided that was a pretty good thing. We did destroy the churches. We did kill 5 people. I think we'll do that. And so the chiefs themselves delivered the two men responsible for the uprising to St. Augustine. A trial was held, they were hung, and that was the end of it. Now, that was in 1597. Between 1597 and 1606, the Gwali people begged and begged for priests to come back. They had fully rebuilt the 6 mission churches. Franciscans, very brave Franciscans, finally went back within 2 years and started their catechesis again. And when Bishop Altamirano came up from Cuba, the first place he went was to the Gwali missions, and he was able to confirm 350 Gwali Native Americans in 1606. So you just think about what a fast turnover time. In 1597, you have this uprising, and priests are killed and missions are destroyed. And by 1606, 350 people are confirmed when the bishop makes his episcopal rounds. That's like, it blows my mind how quickly it happened. So that can only happen through the Holy Spirit. So those are our Gwali martyrs. Things were kind of quiet for a little while, but as the British landed and they started to instill anti-Catholic sentiments among the Creek and the Yamasee Indians, they outfitted the Creeks and the Yamasees with alcohol and with guns. The Spanish crown was petitioned over and over and over again to provide guns to the Native Americans in La Florida. But the crown agonized this. You can read this in the letters that went back and forth between the heads of state. And they agonized about whether or not to provide the missions with guns for defense, for self-defense. And they said, well, the catechesis has gone so well. We have so much documentation of harmony between tribes, especially in Appalachia, where you would have a mission church and village right next to a village that chose not to convert and continue in their Native American spirituality, but yet there was peace and harmony. There wasn't this attack or competition or anything. And so the Spanish monarchy kept saying, no, guns are just going to introduce a whole new level of violence that we're trying to avoid in this area. So they never did. And the British, that we became easy pickings, so to speak. So they instilled not just this conquest in the minds of the Creek and the Yamasee, but they instilled a very specific anti-Catholic propaganda, if you will. And so they would teach the Creek and the Yamasee how to mock the Catholic faith. And in the British military policy, especially John Moore, Oglethorpe, the major players that attacked in Florida, you can see in their writings that they wanted to instill fear in the hearts of the Indians that they captured. So in order to do this, they would target the priests of a particular mission or the chiefs or both. And they would have these horrendously long, tortuous deaths and make all the Native Americans that they had captured watch this torture in order to instill fear and then have them become very docile and easily led away for the slave trade. So that was the British military propaganda. So that's kind of what we're going into. There were a couple of skirmishes in the 1600s. There were two major events, one in 1649 and another one in 1680, but they were kind of, in the overall scheme of things, they're important. Their martyrs are part of the cause, but I'm not going to focus on them today because I want to focus on the core of the destruction of the Florida mission chain. Like I said, the British would come in and round up either the chief or the priest or both and have these very long tortures. One little man that I love the most is a little Appalachian Native American. His name was Manuel. We know a lot about Manuel because of the Indians who survived to tell us his story of his life and his death, but he's the only martyr that we have right now where we have an eyewitness account of his martyrdom from two Indians of his village, but we also have an eyewitness account of a soldier who was fighting for the British, who was left for dead and was rescued or recovered by the Spanish military when they came through after his village was destroyed. And also 4 months after the date of his martyrdom gave the same eyewitness account as the two Indians did. So he's the only one we have where we have corroboration of his martyrdom from both perspectives. So Manuel, he was the son of his little village. He was the son of the chief. And he started off being an altar boy, because most of the altar boys were taken from sons of the chiefs or were chiefs themselves. And he was very catechetical. The Franciscans of the time describe him as being a little scholar. He really loved learning about the faith. So when he reached about 13 years of age, he became the sacristan of the church, which is where the position he held. There's some documentation that showed that he had applied to the seminary in St. Augustine to become a Franciscan priest, and that he was accepted. So if he had lived, he would have been our first Native American priest here in the United States. So he has a little special place in my heart. He was in the sacristy, cleaning and making sure everything was ready for Mass. The sacristan's job, as many of you know, is to keep the candlesticks polished and the altar linens clean and the priest's vestments pressed and exactly how they should be for Mass. When the British and the Creeks invaded his little village. Now, he wasn't even aware that his entire family had just been murdered by the British as they came into the village. The villagers were scattering, trying to get into the woods. About 100 of his fellow braves were captured for the slave trade. But the first thing that the British did was ride in on horseback and set fire to the chapel. So poor Manuel, he's in the chapel and he's yelling for people, please come bring water, please help me stop this fire. They're going to burn Jesus. And this is his belief. Christ is in the tabernacle. Christ is about to be burned. He's pulling the tapestries off the wall. He's doing everything that he can to put this fire out. Well, 2 Creek Indians and a British officer come into the chapel and they start to mock him. And they say, if your God is so great, why don't you get on your knees and pray to your God to put this fire out? So poor Manuel, at this point, he's in panic. He kneels down, he lifts his hands up in prayer, and they come up behind him and they cut his arms off above his elbows. Oh. So he's yelling at them, do you not know what you're doing? Jesus is in the tabernacle, you're about to burn him. And one of the Indians hits him so hard in the mouth that they break his jaw and most of his teeth come out. So now he's bleeding. He's in this total pain. He's pleading with them to save Christ in the tabernacle. And at this point, the chapel is almost burnt, so they pull him out of the chapel. They make him watch as the chapel finishes burning down to the ground, and then they drown him in the trough. And that's the end, and he dies. So two of the braves that had survived and were in the bushes, they made their way back to St. Augustine, and they gave their full eyewitness account to the ecclesiastical authorities and to the secular authorities. But one of the soldiers that was with the British had been wounded and left for dead in the ground. So when the Spanish military came through, which they always did after they found out that a mission had been attacked, they came through trying to help rescue any survivors, see if there was anything left that could be salvaged, bring any of the survivors back to St. Augustine to protect them. They found this soldier face down. Well, it turns out this soldier was actually a Spanish soldier who had betrayed Spain and become a British officer. And so they took him back to the Castillo, and they nursed him back to health, and he was telling all these crazy stories, trying to get himself out of his inevitable, court-martial. But then they came to the story of Manuel, and they asked him to give his eyewitness account. And it's the one story that the secular authorities say this is the only story that he told the truth on. And he gave the exact eyewitness account that the 2 other braves had given 4 months earlier. So that's Manuel. Can you imagine being 15 years old and having the strength and conviction of your faith that you're willing to die for it? that to me is just amazing. What kind of catechesis it takes to have that kind of a faith to have. Up in Jacksonville, outside of Mayport, if any of you have ever been to the Kingsley Plantation, there is a little road path and a mile marker 9. Mile marker 9 was put there years and years ago by a group of Catholics who had heard a tale of a martyrdom occurring there. They didn't know who or what. They just knew because of, stories being handed down over time that a martyrdom occurred there. Well, now we know who was martyred there. It's a beautiful woman named Mariana and her son Jacinto. And I think this story is important, especially from a morality perspective, because I'm not sure today's morality we're deluded a little, or dilution of our morality. We may not have the strength to do what this woman did. But this is a little picture of Mariana and her son that we have today. This isn't them accurately, but you can see they're holding hands and praying the rosary, and this is going to be very important for a visual for their martyrdoms. Mariana was the wife of a chief. Her husband was out at the time her village was attacked. She was the sacristan for her little church, and Jacinto, her son, always helped her. He was 9 years old at the time. The British came in and attacked their mission, and of course rounded up Mariana and Jacinto. And they tied the two of them to a stake facing each other. And Mariana is looking into her son and saying, we have to start praying the rosary. We need to pray the rosary. So they begin to pray the rosary together, looking into each other's eyes. Then the Creeks get behind her son. They've lit a fire underneath his feet. And they tell the mother that if you do not renounce your Catholic faith, we will kill your son. And she's looking into his eyes, and they're praying the rosary. And she says, I cannot renounce my faith. That would be like renouncing my own physical life. It would be like killing my heart. I cannot do that. And so in front of her eyes, while she's praying the rosary with her son, they club him. He's already, has the fire under his feet, and he dies. She continues to pray the rosary as a mother, and because she's the wife of a chief, they give her a second chance and say, if you will renounce your Catholic faith, we will allow you to live. And she says, I cannot go with you. You do not have the sacraments. The sacraments are my life. If I go with you, I die. So I stay here. I refuse to renounce my faith. And so she was clubbed to death and beaten, and that was her martyrdom. But imagine that faith today. Today we might say, oh, well, I can't deny my faith because that will mean my child's death. But you're in a situation, if you deny your faith, that your faith is your life. And so I think the beauty of this particular martyrdom is it really brings together that our faith is spiritual and physical, that we have to believe that our faith is our life, the totality of our life, like Mariana and Jacinto believed. And so she was not going to betray her son's life and her son's faith by saying, I don't believe in God, thinking she was going to save his life. That might have done more for him to lose his faith than to save his faith. So it's a hard morality thing, and I was thinking about it when we were driving over here this morning, that this particular event specifically gives us a moral challenge to really think through, how would I do that? What would I do if I was in Mariana's position as a mother, or in her son's position? Would I as a son scream out, Mother, deny it, I want to live? Or would I say, Mom, please don't deny it. This is our faith. This is our love. What kind of catechesis do we bring to our family that allows all of our family to believe in everlasting life? So, she's so beautiful. She's for me. We have, let's see, where did I put that little picture? Here we go. So, the very first Native American, meaning born in the United States, priest to be martyred is Father Augustin de Ponce de Leon. And this is our little representation of him. Again, we don't have pictures or anything, But I want to talk about him because he is the first priest born in St. Augustine, graduated from the Franciscan Seminary, to be martyred in the New World. Father Augustine Ponce de Leon was a descendant of Ponce de Leon, like a cousin or a great cousin or something down the line, not a direct descendant. But he was born in St. Augustine. He graduated from the Franciscan Seminary, and he had been assigned to many different missions in the Florida mission chain. In 1704, he was assigned to a little mission called Mission Nombre de Dios Chiquito, which was a little mission on Anastasia Island, pretty close to, well, not really on the island, close to where Fort Matanzas is, if any of you have been there. And his particular group of Native Americans were fishers, and they were quarrymen. They quarried the coquina quarries. And what happened was Mission Nombre de Dios, the Our Lady Shrine, had been attacked and plundered by the British again. So he had left his shrine to go up to Our Lady's Shrine. He had left his mission to go to Our Lady's Shrine and help try to recover any of the Catholic artifacts, the crucifix, the candle, whatever he could recover. While he was in St. Augustine, the British went down the San Sebastian River around St. Augustine out of the scope of the Spanish military and came up to his mission. And they attacked his mission. They took, I think it was around 200 of the braves, the people from his particular mission, and his 2 altar boys. Now, priests were very dedicated to their altar boys back then. And they were starting to make their way north to St. Augustine. In the Timucua documents, Father Augustine has a very unique description, because Timucua people were very tall. They were on average around 6 feet. Well, Father Augustine was kind of a mutant in the Spanish world because he was well over 6 feet. And he's described by the Timucuans as, for every 8 strides of a Timucuan brave, Father Augustine could do it in 6. So it's kind of a very beautiful way to describe someone. So he's this very big, robust man. And the British are making their way north with the people for the slave trade and his 2 altar boys. He hears about it, he's running back to go to his mission, but his sacristan, Roberto, intercepts him and says, no, Father, they're heading north now. They're almost to San Augustine. So he turns around and he's running, and poor Roberto's left way back there. And he gets to the shrine, the current day Nombre de Dios, and he gets there, and he's holding his hands up, and he's running, and he sees the Creek Indians, and he sees his 2 altar boys, and he says, stop, stop. And he's just showing that he doesn't have any guns or any weapons, and he says, please stop. Give me those 2 altar boys. Take me instead. You'll get more for me in ransom than you will for those 2 little skinny altar boys on the slave trade. Take me instead. And this just incenses the Creek Indians and a couple of the British soldiers, and they turn around and they fire a volley of arrows and a couple of bullets into Father, and he falls down flat. About this time, Roberto catches up with him, and Roberto sees there's nothing he can do. He's outmanned, he has no weapons, so Roberto hides in the scrub, and he kind of gives witness. He's watching this, as well as a couple other people who have come up with him. So they're watching this, and Father miraculously gets back up and goes running after them again, saying, stop, stop. This time, the Creeks are really upset because this guy is too stupid to die. And they turn around and they're incensed by this man. And so what they do, they're totally just unbelievable. They bring the 2 altar boys, and Father's laying face down. They've clubbed him again. This time he's dying, and they pull his head up, and they make him watch as they torture and martyr his 2 altar boys in front of him. And then after his altar boys, Julio and Jacinto, after they die, then they finish Father off. And so the 3 of them died together right there on the mission grounds. So the Creeks, they continued to head north with the British behind them on horseback, And Roberto comes out of the bushes. Now, the other Native Americans stayed behind, but Roberto was like, my dear priest, I can't leave his body out here. For the animals, he has to have a Christian burial. And so he's out there trying to collect Father's body and the two altar boys to give them a decent burial. And a couple of straggling Creeks come up from behind and see this happening, and they kill Roberto in the process of him trying to bury his father. Now, because Father Augustine was a native of St. Augustine, the documents say that they had a full city funeral for Father Augustine, for the two altar boys, and for Roberto. And the documents say that Father was buried under a horizontal coquina cross with all the rites and the graces that they could afford at the time. Well, I've looked all over St. Augustine for that horizontal coquina cross, and there's only one place that I can find it, and that's at the Fountain of Youth. There's a horizontal coquina cross right in front of the spring. And I can't say anything because I don't have any corroboration yet, but it's so funny how the tour guides, when you go to the Fountain of Youth, say that particular coquina cross was put there by Ponce de Leon, and you're like, really? He was only here for a day? They didn't even know what coquina was, much less quarry it, but okay. So you see how you can get lulled in by tour guides, right? So I'm not sure if that is the cross that Father Augustine is buried underneath, but it sure gives you a moment to stop and reflect if you ever go and visit the Fountain of Youth. You know, just stand and say, Father, if you're here, take my prayers up to heaven for me. So I can't think you can go wrong with that. So that's Father Augustine. He was our first martyr. Then we have, oh goodness, I think we should probably go ahead to Antonio. When we put the cause together, there's a vice postulator that represents all of the major groups that are involved in the martyrdom. For example, we have Dominicans, we have Jesuits, we have Franciscans, we've got Spanish military, and we've got Native Americans. So there's 5 main groups of people who are represented in this cause for canonization. Well, in 1982, Rome changed the rubrics for canonization process and procedures, and if you have a group of people, Rome wants only one prototype martyr. Well, this is where Catholic politics gets sticky again. So we're trying to narrow down who should be the prototype martyr, the person representing all of these wonderful men, women, children who died defending the faith. And we finally get down to 2 people. Well, it really should have been 1 all along, but we're down to 2 people, and one of the bishops in the state wouldn't give up on the one he wanted. So he asked us to send a request for a variance back to Rome. That takes about 3 months, and then we had to wait for the answer, and we got the answer, and the Vatican was very clear, said no, only 1 prototype martyr. And so we had a beautiful little prayer meeting in Tampa, and everybody came to peace and to terms with who we chose, and that's Antonio Cuipa. Antonio Cuipa deserves a little bit longer. 1, because we know so much about him, but 2, because he is our prototype martyr. For those of you that have been to Mission San Luis, he was the mission chief at Mission San Luis. The Appalachian Nation was a nation where there was one major chief, and at the time of this in the 1704-1705 range, that chief's name was Don Patricio Hinachuba. Don Patricio and his wife were martyred on the grounds of the Castillo in St. Augustine on the northwest quadrant of the shrine grounds. And we have a little spiritual adoption program, and the Sons of Our Lady, we put all the names of the martyrs in a little bowl that hadn't been adopted yet, and the Sons of Our Lady pulled out the wife of Don Patricio Hinachuba as their spiritual adoption. So I think because of their prayers to Don Patricio's wife, we've learned even more about him and about Antonio, which has been very helpful. So Don Patricio was in charge of all of the different Appalachia villages, and Antonio Quipa. Quipa means like under chief or chief of a smaller village. He was the chief of Mission San Luis. Mission San Luis, though, wasn't that small. There were 12,000 Catholic Native Americans that lived in that particular village. Don Patricio came to St. Augustine in 1703 to write his last will and testament and to have it notarized. By this time, he was considered what would then be what we consider a third order Franciscan. He was what we would today call a deacon in the church. We know that he was allowed to read the gospel from the ambo, from the podium. So to us that says he was recognized as a deacon. But he came to St. Augustine, he wrote his last will and testament, had it notarized, and we actually have the original copy. And it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. And it reads like the creed. He talks about what he believes in. He's thankful for this beautiful gift of faith, that he is a second-generation Catholic. His parents were converts to Catholicism, and they gave him this gift of faith. He's married to a wonderful woman named Josefa. He has 2 beautiful children. He is in charge of catechesis for his particular mission, and he loves his Catholic faith. He asks to be buried in a Franciscan habit when he dies. And then he does something that it gave me a little, He does something in the second to the last paragraph of his last will and testament, and he leaves enough money so that 50 masses will be said for his soul when he dies. What an insurance marker. I was like, I gotta go change my will. This is like, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed. It was so beautiful. Like, wow, he really understands his Catholic faith. And so it was notarized and a copy was kept in St. Augustine. The copy that we have is actually the copy from St. Augustine, that when Spain left St. Augustine in 1763 and Britain acquired Florida, Spain emptied everything out of Florida, everything, all the documents, all the people, the Catholic Indians that wanted to go and leave, they all went to Cuba. Everything was emptied out. And so this last will and testament is one of the things that we were able to find that was emptied out and taken down to Cuba. He was a phenomenal carpenter. He was likened to St. Joseph. He is the one that engineered and ordered the construction of, when you go to see Mission San Luis today, the chief house and the chapel, which is huge, and those are reproductions, but they're based exactly on the archaeological evidence that we have. He made flutes and would decorate them and paint them, and he would play all of the Marian hymns on the flutes, and he would take that with him when he catechized. He would go out with the priests, or he would go out with some of his own men to catechize the different Native Americans in Central Florida. He's credited with having brought more than 14,000 Native Americans to the Catholic faith from out in the woods and the places where the priests couldn't get to. So you can see that he was well loved by his people. He was a great catechist, and he loved his faith. On January 24th, 1705, the mission of Ayubali, which was about 23 miles away from Mission San Luis, was under attack from the British. It was a huge mission. The priest there, Father Mendoza, had been tied to a stake and burned alive. The mission was just under a total attack. Antonio heard about it, rallied 54 of his best warriors, and they went to try to help rescue or defend Mission Ayubali. By the time they got there, they weren't prepared for what they found. There were over 1,200 British officers, Creek Indians there, that were still in attendance at this mission. They rounded up all 54 of the Braves, and Antonio was there with 2 other chiefs, Quipa Domingo and Quipa Feliciano. So, in true British fashion, in order to make a spectacle of the chiefs, They put the 3 chiefs on crucifixes. This drawing that we have was actually done, the artist did this before we had the eyewitness accounts of Antonia's martyrdom. So she was basing it off of some of the history that we knew, but we now know that Antonia was spread out like Christ on the cross. They put these 3 chiefs on the cross. They lit fires underneath their feet, got a very high fire. And what they would do is they would take the charcoal from the embers from the fire, and they would put huge gashes in the bellies of their muscles, and then they would put these hot embers in to cauterize them so that they would die a very slow and painful death. For Antonio, this went on for 7 hours. The whole time that he's on the cross, though, he's shouting from the cross, "Be strong, my brothers, be strong. This is our faith. Our faith will save us." And then he's admonishing the Indians who are doing this to them. "Do you not know what you're doing to your immortal soul? You are endangering your immortal soul. This is wrong." I mean, here he is being tortured in pain, and he is worried about his persecutors and their immortal soul and the danger they're putting themselves in. And he's preaching from the cross for 7 hours, and he and his 2 other chiefs, they're going back and forth. And Feliciano is always known as the one he's a quiet one, and he would keep saying, "Amen, amen." It's like, I'm with you, brother, kind of a thing. So after 7 hours on the cross, when Antonio he's losing his life, his energy is gone. He's so very quiet. There's a stillness in what's going on. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he springs into life, and he's yelling at the top of his lungs, "Be strong, my brothers, be strong. Our Lady is here with us. I am looking into her eyes, and in her eyes I am gaining the strength and the courage I need to endure this martyrdom. Be strong. She is here, and she will take all of us to heaven." And then he dies. And it's like, we have 3 or 4 eyewitness accounts of what he said from the cross. And to me, it's just, well, one, it's the first Marian apparition that we know of in the United States, but we'll have to do a whole separate tract of research to have that proclaimed. But the important thing for me was the wording he used. He said, "I am looking in her eyes." That's the exact wording that Our Lady of Guadalupe told Juan Diego. "Look to my eyes. In my eyes, you will see that in the center of my eyes, you will see all that I hold most near and dear." And it took us until 1979 to know exactly what she was talking about when Dr. Jose Tunsman did the definitive refractive studies of the eyeballs of Our Lady in the tilma. And what he was able to show us was that in the colored part of the eye was an exact picture, not a replica, a picture of Bishop Zumárraga, Juan Diego holding open an empty tilma, an African woman, and a Spanish magistrate. But in the center of the pupil was a mother, a father, 3 children, and a set of grandparents. That is what she holds most near and dear, the concept of family. And what is under attack today? The family. So this message that she delivered in 1531 is continuing throughout time. So that's the story of Antonio. You can see why we chose him as our prototype martyr. And then from him, January 25th, which is coming up soon, is the feast of his martyrdom. So maybe this year it will hold a little something special for all of you. So that's pretty much where I want to conclude as far as the martyrs and the specific stories. One of the sons, when I first got involved with the Sons of Our Lady, they invited me to come to their rosary group and to start talking about the Florida martyrs. So they meet at 6 in the morning. so I would get up and drive to Jacksonville, and I presented the story of the Florida martyrs. Well, there's one gentleman who's an author who was fighting going to these meetings because he didn't want to get up that early. And finally one day he did, and I happened to be talking, and he came to the meeting, and it was all well and good. And then he goes home and he doesn't get up again for 6 more months. And so finally 6 months later he decides to come to the Sons of Our Lady Rosary again. and I'm talking again, poor guy. And the second time, the story of the martyrs really grabbed his heart. And so he started on his own journey, trying to find out who these people were, what do we know, where were they leading him in prayer. So the outcome of his work was this little book called The Florida Martyrs, Compelled by Compassion. And so he writes about the 86 martyrs, not the 300 more that we know about now, but the 86 martyrs that were known at the time of the opening of the cause. And it's a beautiful little book because it talks about his story, how he got involved, and how these martyrs are impacting him today. So that we have this book up here. The Sons of Our Lady have been just phenomenal in helping to get the word out about the story of the Florida martyrs. And I wanted to kind of end with the impact that the martyrs are having today on people today, especially our young seminarians. 2 years ago, a new wing of the seminary down in Boynton Beach was built and was dedicated to the martyrs of La Florida. I've gone down there a couple of times now to do theology on tap and just talk about these people and the catechesis, because as young seminarians, to learn how to be able to catechize and share the gift of faith with people to where they're willing to die for their belief, that they totally understand that the Eucharist is the real presence of Christ. When straw polls are taken and 50% of American Catholics say they don't believe in the real presence, we have a crisis of catechesis. So I think that is one of the reasons why the Holy Spirit is making this story known to us now, is how do we catechize, how do we help people go so deep in their faith and their prayer life that they understand this is the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. So I wanted to just share with you a little writing by a seminary at the time. He's now a priest. He's with the Diocese of Orlando. Many of you may know him, Father Blake Britton. He's a phenomenal priest. He was an opera singer as a young man before he entered the seminary. And so I wanted to share this. It's called The Gift of the Florida Martyrs. I first met Antonio Quipa Anisia in the same way most good Catholics meet each other, amidst laughter, food, and good red wine. I was having dinner with a friend in Jacksonville when I heard his name mentioned in relation to the missionary activity that had taken place in North Florida. For the next several hours, I sat and listened in amazement, enthralled by the story of this Appalachian Indian and his companions who shed their blood as a testament of faith in Jesus Christ and his church. As an American in general, and a Floridian in particular, I immediately recognized the gravity of these events and what they mean for our country. Not only do they shed light on a historical reality that has been hidden and often obscured in regard to the mission chain of La Florida, but more importantly, the lives of these Catholic Americans offer an incarnate witness, a Christian summons that cries out to their brothers and sisters in hopes of reminding them of a truth that has been all but forgotten. Jesus Christ is alive and he loves you. A few days after hearing about the Florida martyrs, I was doing my holy hour when an image came to mind. I saw a heart, stale and dying, being fed with lukewarm blood. It was barely beating and was gray in complexion. Then, like a torrent, a flood of fresh new blood came coursing through this heart, filling it with life and changing its hue to a rich red. I knew this was the heart of our nation, stale and poorly nourished. This fresh new blood is the life and passion of the Florida martyrs, the life and passion of those rooted in Jesus Christ. I believe that this cause not only possesses the potential to deepen the already kindling faith in the Florida Church, but beyond that, to serve as a conduit by which to revitalize the heart of our country, which is longing for its Creator in every vice that it indulges. From the laughter of Antonio Quipa to the zeal of Father Menendez, we see in the lives of these martyrs a joyful and fulfilled humanity that lacks nothing in Christ. It is the answer to the wound that has struck at our people to the core, a negation of their human desire for God. As a future priest, I look to the example of these women and men who steadfastly held to the conviction of their own belovedness in the eyes of the Father. It convicts me, inspires me, and challenges me to be a man who is guided by the fire of the Spirit, settling for nothing less than sainthood. This is the greatest gift the Florida Martyrs give us, the zealous flame of love by which Christ yearns to see the world set ablaze. We are a people of fire, set upon a hill and called to be the light of the world. In the end, I think Antonio's martyrdom was most fitting for his person. For what better way to send a flame of God home to his Father than amidst the fires of a world that knew not what it was doing? Isn't that beautiful? I can't believe I got through without crying. I usually do that. I'm so glad. So, what I'd like to do now is invite all of you to become part of this process of canonization. Does everybody have their prayer for canonization? Do we have that? It's the one with Antonio Cuipa on the front. Oh, my brothers. I have him right here. So one of the beautiful things for me when I got involved with Caterina Cuipa was she was still blessed. And so as I was studying her, I actually was doing a project for Bishop Snyder at the time. He wanted a retreat for all the Catholic Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and their family, and he asked me if I would come up with something, and out of my mother's Catholic Girl Scout prayer book fell a prayer card for the canonization of Blessed Caterina Cuipa, and I thought, how perfect. I can teach the kids about Native American Catholicism. They can understand enculturation, what Vatican II truly meant by the word enculturation. It wasn't about taking the Mass from Latin and putting it into English. It was about the cultural expression of the gospel and how to respect that cultural expression. And the fact that Caterina was still a blessed meant that I could teach the Scouts how to be part of the canonization process by getting to know who this person was and saying the prayer for canonization. So, for now that she's a saint, when we all say this prayer, if you all will say this prayer once a day, once a week, you become part of their process for canonization, because through these prayers we petition the Holy Spirit, because all canonizations are in the time of the Holy Spirit. You can fill out, you can do everything by the book and do all the rubrics, but I can personally tell you that someone is not canonized until the Holy Spirit says it's time. So it doesn't matter what we say or what we do. The canonization is not a political event of the Catholic Church. It is in the time of the Holy Spirit. So I would like to invite all of you to be part of this wonderful cause for canonization of these wonderful people by saying this prayer together today. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. O God, Father of all nations, you have summoned us to announce the freedom of your children. We thank you for calling your servants, Antonio Cuipa and his companions, to proclaim the Catholic faith during the birth of a new nation. May their example of suffering and forgiveness give us the courage to bear witness to Christ in our own time. We also pray that they be counted one day among your saints. Through the intercession of your servants, grant us the following grace, which we ask from your loving kindness. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Just a quick footnote in the prayer where it says, during the birth of a new nation, I do not think that refers to the United States of America. I think it refers to the kingdom of God, the nation of Christ. So let's remember that. And that launches me into my last commercial, Deacon. October 11th, 2020, we will have a canonical coronation of Our Lady of La Leche. And I want to quickly explain what that means. A canonical coronation is a very special privilege that's granted and a blessing from the Pope that recognizes the fama of a particular image of Our Lady, Christ, or Saint Joseph. Those are the only three figures that can be crowned in Catholicism. It is not like a main crowning. It is not like a diocesan crowning. It happens only once in infinity for a particular image. And there's only been 3 in the United States, one in 1895 in New Orleans, Our Lady of Prompt Succor, one in 1905 in Harlem, New York, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and then again in 2013, Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception in Lake Charles, Louisiana. So this will be only the 4th pontifical coronation. There's only been 350 ever in the history of the Catholic Church. This is a very special thing, not only for Our Lady, but for us, because those of you that can attend, your attendance in this official coronation will be your witness to say, Our Lady is Queen of heaven and earth, Christ is our King, and we make up the kingdom of God. That is the new nation. So, the books are up here if anyone's interested. I want to thank you all so much for having me. Liz, I have a gift for you, and I also have a gift for your parish. One of the books of the Martyrs, plus a prayer book of the prayers, the poetry of the Martyrs. And if any of you have questions afterwards, I truly welcome them. And again, Sons of Our Lady, thank you once again for being my escorts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soha. You know, the only thing that, Dr. Mary, the thing that kept coming to my mind is how many of us here, in just the course of our life, at work, at school, the supermarket, have an opportunity to witness to not our Christian faith, our Catholic faith, and then maybe get cold feet and don't do it. I think when that time comes, stop and say a prayer to these martyrs of Florida. Ask for their intercession, for the courage to witness to their faith, because it's not going to cost us our life like it cost them. So another special thank you, in addition to Dr. Mary, of course, the behind the scenes, Liz, thank you so much. Liz Kennedy, who is the driving force behind this, in the background, way in the back, thank you. And of course, everyone, you know we have Mass at 11:30. Please join us.